During a routine pediatric exam, my patient's mother laughed and said, "We've had her appendix checked at 6 different hospitals this month." I froze, immediately recognizing the sign of abuse. 6 different hospitals? She was looking for someone who'd say yes to unnecessary surgery and pain pills. She didn't know medical professionals are trained to spot this exact pattern. "What? My appendix?" Lily's voice cracked. "Mom, you told me we were here about my autoimmune thing." Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "And at St. Mary's, you said it was kidney failure." The mother started stuttering. "You're confused, sweetie. The medications make you..." I stopped listening and searched up her daughter's name on the computer database. 47 emergency room visits in 18 months. Different symptoms every single time. "Mrs. Lee," I said slowly, "these visits form a very concerning pattern." The room went dead silent. Lily's face changed completely. That's when I watched it click. "Mom, you always tell me I'm sick when I say I feel fine. You give me medicine even when I say I don't hurt." Tears started rolling down her face as the truth crashed over her. "The pills make me feel worse than whatever's supposed to be wrong with me." She was putting it all together now. Years of confusion suddenly making horrible sense. "I've been in hospital since I was 6. I learned to read from medical pamphlets in waiting rooms. I couldn't join dance because of my condition." Then she said something that made everyone in that room stop breathing. "Dad left because he said you were making me sick." So, was Dad right? I had to intervene. I turned to Lily. "When do you feel sickest?" "After taking my medicine." I looked at Mrs. Lee. "It's clear that the medicine is causing her symptoms." Lily's face went white as paper. "The surgery scars. Were those real?" Her mother's silence was deafening. "The feeding tube when I was 8? Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "The kidney procedure? Were any of them real?" She was hyperventilating now. "You let them cut me open?" The break in her voice destroyed me. This 12-year-old child looked at her mother with such betrayal it physically hurt to witness. She looked at her arms. "How many IVs? How many blood draws? You watched them tie me down when I fought back. You told them I was being difficult. I believed you. I told everyone I was sick. I defended you when Dad said you were lying." Her whole body was shaking. "I chose you in the divorce because you understood my illness. You made me sick. Actually made me sick. I'm 12 and I've spent half my life in hospitals for nothing." She touched her stomach where the scars were. "I missed Gelly's birthday parties. All of them. Every single year because I was too fragile." Her hands were trembling so violently she couldn't stop them. "I watched my friends grow up through Instagram from hospital beds. When teachers asked what I wanted to be when I grew up, I couldn't answer because I didn't think I'd grow up. I thought I was dying, Mom. You made me write goodbye letters when I was 9. My hand was already on the emergency button. My birthday parties. I never had one. Not one." Her voice broke completely. "Every year you'd schedule something right before my birthday. You told everyone I was too immunocompromised for visitors. My best friend stopped talking to me after you told her mom I was terminal. You helped me decide who should get my stuffed animals when I died." "Mrs. Lee, I'm mandated to report this. Security and social services are on their way." The mother lunged toward Lily. "Baby, tell them you need me." Lily backed against the wall, and her response was so cold it gave me chills. I needed a mother, not a captor. Then she whispered something that broke my heart. "Can you call my dad? Tell him he was right about everything." As security arrived, Mrs. Lee broke down sobbing. "I can't lose another one. Not like Lily." She froze, realizing what she'd said. "Another one? Like who?" Mrs. Lee's face went completely white and she stumbled backward like someone had punched her in the stomach. The security guards moved closer to the doorway while I kept my finger on the emergency button under the desk. Nobody said anything for what felt like forever. It was probably only 5 seconds. Mrs. Lee's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words that wouldn't come. Jeremy Watkins, the big security guy who usually works nights, stepped into the room and quietly spoke into his radio, asking for 2 more officers to pediatric exam room 3. Mrs. Lee's eyes started darting around the room, looking at the door, then the window, then back at Lily, who was still pressed against the wall. Her hands were shaking so bad she dropped her purse and medical papers scattered across the floor. Jeremy moved between Mrs. Lee and the door while keeping his hands visible and his voice calm. I stood up slowly and walked over to Lily, putting myself between her and her mother. "Lily, we need to get you checked out in another room," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. She nodded and grabbed my hand so tight it hurt. The nursing supervisor appeared in the doorway, and I could see 2 more security guards behind her in the hallway. Mrs. Lee started moving toward us, but Jeremy stepped forward just enough to block her path without touching her. "My baby needs me," Mrs. Lee said, but her voice sounded weird and high. Lily's grip on my hand got even tighter as we walked toward the door. The nursing supervisor put her arm around Lily's shoulders, and we walked down the hall together, our footsteps echoing on the tile floor. I could hear Mrs. Lee behind us saying she wanted her lawyer, that this was kidnapping, that she'd sue everyone. Lily was shaking, but she kept walking, looking straight ahead. When we got far enough down the hall that her mom couldn't hear us, Lily whispered something that made my stomach drop. Sometimes at night when she gives me medicine, she calls me the wrong name. I stopped walking for a second. What name does she call you? Lily looked up at me with those huge, scared eyes. She calls me Emma sometimes, when she thinks I'm asleep. We got Lily settled in a room on the other side of the pediatric ward, and I grabbed my tablet to start documenting everything. I typed as fast as I could, making sure to get Lily's exact words about being called Emma during late-night medication administration. The nursing supervisor stayed with Lily while I went to the nurse's station to make sure security had Mrs. Lee contained. Jeremy had her sitting in the original exam room with 2 guards at the door. She wasn't under arrest, but she wasn't free to leave either. About 40 minutes later, Veronica Navarro from CPS showed up, moving fast despite carrying 2 huge binders and a laptop bag. She was someone I'd worked with before on other cases, and she didn't mess around. I showed her my documentation and watched her face get more and more serious as she read about the other child named Lily, and now this Emma name. She asked to see Lily right away, and I walked her to the room where the kid was curled up in the hospital bed looking way too small. Veronica sat down in the chair next to the bed, not too close but not too far, and started talking in this soft voice that somehow made you want to tell her everything. She asked Lily about home, about school, about her daily routine. Lily started talking, slow at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. She told Veronica about the boxes and boxes of medical stuff in the basement that she wasn't allowed to touch or even look at. She said there were 4 bags, syringes, bottles of medicine, even some machines she didn't know the names of. Veronica took notes on her tablet while I stood by the door, and every few minutes she'd ask a gentle question to keep Lily talking. Meanwhile, the hospital administrator had called in the pharmacy consultant to pull records from our system and others. Within an hour, the consultant came to find me with a stack of printouts that made my head spin. Mrs. Lee had been getting prescriptions from 14 different doctors across 6 hospital systems in 3 counties. She never used the same pharmacy twice in a row, and she paid cash for everything. The pattern went back 3 years and showed careful planning to stay under each system's radar. The consultant pointed out that some prescriptions were filled on the same day at pharmacies 50 miles apart. Veronica took one look at those records and stepped into the hallway to make a phone call. I could hear her talking to someone about getting an emergency warrant for the Lee house, specifically mentioning the medical supplies in the basement and the need to search for any information about other children. She came back in and told me the police would be at the house within 2 hours. The hospital's legal team had already started the paperwork for a protective hold, which meant nobody could remove Lily from our care without a judge's order. Mrs. Lee must have found out about this because we could hear her yelling from down the hall, demanding to see her daughter, threatening to call the news, saying we were violating her rights. Security kept her contained while we focused on keeping Lily safe and getting her the help she needed after years of medical abuse that was finally coming to light. Lily looked up at me with those big scared eyes and asked if she could call her dad. She said she needed to tell him she was sorry for not believing him all those years. I grabbed the hospital phone and helped her dial the number she knew by heart. Veronica stayed in the room taking notes while Lily waited for him to pick up. When her dad's voice came through the speaker, Lily started crying so hard she could barely talk. She kept saying sorry over and over while her dad was crying too on the other end. He told her none of this was her fault, and that he was getting in his car right now to come get her. The call lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it felt like forever watching this kid finally connect with the parent who tried to protect her. After they hung up, her dad started texting me every 30 minutes with updates about where he was on the highway. He was 3 hours away, but driving as fast as he could without getting pulled over. Lily kept checking the clock on the wall every few minutes, counting down how long until he'd get here. She was scared, but also excited to see him after choosing wrong in the divorce. While we waited, the nursing supervisor came to find me with a stack of papers she'd been going through. She discovered something weird in the computer records from all those different hospitals. Mrs. Lee had been using different versions of Lily's name at each place. Sometimes she registered her as Lily Ann, other times as Lillian, and once even as L.A. Ann Lee. This made it way harder for the hospital systems to connect all the visits together. The supervisor showed me how the pattern only became clear when you searched for partial name matches. About an hour later, Miguel Valle from the hospital risk management knocked on my door. He needed to talk to me about all the documentation I'd been doing and what liability issues we might be facing. Miguel sat down with his laptop and went through every note I'd written, making sure I'd been careful and factual in my recording. He kept saying we needed to support the protective measures for Lily while also covering ourselves legally. He made me go back and add more details to some of my earlier notes about exactly what I'd observed. While Miguel and I were still working on the paperwork, security called to say a lawyer had shown up demanding to see Mrs. Lee. The attorney was loud and angry, saying we had no right to keep his client here. Jeremy explained about the protective hold, but the lawyer kept threatening to sue the hospital and everyone involved. He said we were violating his client's rights and keeping her from her child without cause. Security wouldn't let him pass the desk without proper clearance from administration. The lawyer finally got permission to see Mrs. Lee, but only with Veronica present for the interview. They all went into a conference room where Veronica could ask Mrs. Lee directly about what she'd said earlier. The lawyer kept telling Mrs. Lee not to answer, but Veronica pressed her about the other child she'd mentioned. Mrs. Lee started crying and said everyone misunderstood what she meant. She claimed she meant to say, another time, not another one, and that people were twisting her words. The lawyer backed her up, saying his client was under stress and misspoke. But Veronica wrote down every word and kept pushing for more details about this slip. That evening, while we were still waiting for Lily's dad, the police showed up at the Lee house with a search warrant. They called the hospital to update us on what they were finding. The basement was full of medical supplies worth thousands of dollars. There were 4 bags, tubes, syringes, bottles of medicine, and even some medical machines. They also found a locked filing cabinet that Mrs. Lee's attorney immediately called about. He insisted they couldn't open it without specific authorization, since it might contain privileged documents. The police had to wait for a judge to rule on whether they could break the lock. While all this was happening, Fiona Montgomery, the pediatric psychiatrist, came to evaluate Lily. They sat together in the hospital room, and Fiona asked gentle questions about her experiences. Lily told her about having nightmares where someone was calling her name but meaning someone else. She said in the dreams, someone would say Lily, but be looking at a different girl. Lily wondered now if these weren't dreams but actual memories of her mother confusing her with another child. Fiona took careful notes and told Lily these memories were important to share. About 3.5 hours after that first phone call, Lily's dad finally arrived at the hospital. The moment he walked through the door, Lily jumped out of the bed and ran straight into his arms. She was sobbing and saying she was sorry for choosing wrong in the divorce. Her dad just held her tight and kept telling her over and over that none of this was her fault. He said her mother had fooled everyone, including doctors and judges. They stood there hugging for the longest time while everyone in the room tried not to cry. Later that night, after things calmed down a bit, I started pulling external hospital records from the court system. What I found made me sick to my stomach. Lily's dad had tried multiple times during the divorce to report suspected medical abuse. He'd filed reports with CPS and brought evidence to the custody hearings. But the court dismissed everything as custody battle tactics. The judge actually wrote that the father was being vindictive and trying to alienate the child from her mother. Because of this, Mrs. Lee got primary custody and the dad only got limited visitation. The patient advocate, Jasmine Cummings, arrived about 20 minutes later and sat down next to Lily's bed with a folder full of papers and a gentle smile that made Lily relax a little bit. Jasmine started explaining that Lily had rights as a patient, including the right to say no to any medical treatment she didn't want. And I watched Lily's eyes get wider and wider as she listened. "You mean I can just say no?" Lily asked, and Jasmine nodded and told her that doctors needed her permission or her parents' permission for treatments, but if she felt something was wrong, she could speak up and people had to listen. Lily looked at her dad and then back at Jasmine like she couldn't believe what she was hearing, and she kept touching the scars on her arms while Jasmine talked about informed consent and patient rights. While Jasmine was still explaining things to Lily, my phone buzzed with a text from the police detective saying they'd gotten the judge's approval to open the locked filing cabinet at Mrs. Lee's house. About an hour later, the detective called me directly, and his voice was shaking when he told me what they'd found inside that cabinet. There were medical records for another child, another girl named Lily, who would be 18 years old now if she was still alive. And the detective said the records went back 6 years with hundreds of pages of medical documentation. The papers showed hospital visits, surgeries, medication lists, and treatment plans for this other Lily, all carefully organized in folders with dates and doctor names on every tab. I could hear papers rustling through the phone as the detective went through the files, and he kept saying he'd never seen anything like this level of documentation for a child's medical history.